Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up. Welcome to episode number 14 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is attitude. Our quote of the day comes to us from Winston Churchill. Attitude is a little thing that makes a big difference. As an avid college basketball fan, I'm very excited for today's episode. When it comes to college basketball, our guest today is one of, if not the most knowledgeable and visual experts in the field today. He also happens to be a New York Times best-selling author. I'm honored to introduce Jay Bilas. So Jay, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thank you.
With all the constant negativity throughout the media today, I was curious if you had a personal story you could share with our audience about perseverance, or perhaps a challenging time that tested you, but you kept on going and never quit.
Well, I don't know that it's constant negativity in the media. I think overall the media does a pretty darn good job. There are instances where there's negativity, but I think overall you're looking at a group of professionals that do a really good job. As far as perseverance, I think all of us, myself included, have persevered through rejection and things that have not gone your way when you're trying to make it, whether it's in athletics or school or the broadcast field. I was a lawyer for a number of years, a trial lawyer. And I don't look at, certain obstacles that I've faced or difficulties that I've had necessarily as major problems. It's just been sort of the day-to-day continuing to plug, and grind and keep working without letting that bother me. So while I think, at the time, maybe you're looking at this as a difficulty, but I've always found just continue to chip away at things and they get better.
No, I couldn't agree more. Many of our listeners happen to be into personal development. And I was curious if you have a favorite book or if you've read something recently that you would like to recommend to our listeners.
If I've read something recently, I just got finished with basketball season, so most of what I've read is basketball related. The Winner Within by Pat Riley was a really good book years ago that I read. And I reread it recently last summer, and I really enjoyed it. I think there are a number of good books out there. Rick Pitino's book was really good. Coach K's book, Leading with the Heart, I thought was excellent. I think you can find really good things that'll strike a nerve. The other book I think that I've read recently was Jay Wright's book, Attitude, which I thought was excellent. Jay did a really good job sort of encapsulating all of the principles that he uses with his Villanova program that he's used in his not only coaching life, but life period. That's an excellent book.
Yeah, I just finished reading that myself about a week or so ago. Speaking of books, your book, Toughness, I think is a must read. I've gifted it probably 10 or 11 different times, and I highly recommend it to our listeners. On page 5, you wrote something that I think is really powerful, and I'd like to share it with the audience. You wrote that toughness isn't physical. It has nothing to do with size, physical strength, or athleticism. It isn't an intangible, an attitude, a philosophy. Some people may be born with the aptitude to be tougher than others, but I believe that true toughness is a skill that can be developed and improved in everyone. Would you care to expand a bit on that philosophy?
Well, I think with coaches that I've dealt with, they've always talked about toughness and preached it, but it was never really defined. And that was really the biggest sort of goal of that book, was to define it so that players, coaches, teachers, students, whomever, could talk about it and decide what toughness meant to them. To me, toughness has always been meeting whatever challenge came my way without getting too worked up over it, and figuring out a way to adapt to and overcome whatever obstacle was in my way. And it's not a thing of always having a furrowed brow and I'm going to push people out of the way in order to get my way. That has nothing to do with it. And it wasn't about being the biggest bully on the block when I was playing or trying to be. It was about being difficult to play against and easy to play with. And that was sort of the way I defined it for myself, is that, am I a great teammate? Am I tough enough to be a great teammate? Am I thinking about us rather than me when things are difficult for me? And am I making it really tough on my opponent? Am I the hardest guy to play against for this opponent that I've got? Am I occupying him as well as I need to be?
No, I think that's a really interesting point. Difficult to play against and easy to play with. I think that truly defines what a tough teammate is. And that has so much overlap, not only in the sports world, but in the business world, as well as even with family. I think in life we have many different challenges, but to be difficult to play against and easy to play with, I think that really sums it up. I was curious, where do you want to be 5 years from today, both personally and professionally?
That's an interesting question that I've been asked more than a little bit over the last 10 years. I guess it's just that I'm getting a lot older. But I've never really looked at things that way, and maybe I should. I don't have career goals in that regard. I've always, when I was a kid, I think it was my dad that said this. He said, if you want to get a job, do the job you've got. And I always thought about that I need to stay, focused on what I'm doing rather than what I want to be doing. And luckily for me, I'm doing what I want to be doing right now. Does that mean that I would turn down some sort of opportunity that would come my way in the future? No, but I'm not working this job in order to get another job. And fortunately for me, and I think it is mostly good fortune, because I do believe in luck. I've been very lucky that I've had jobs that I've really liked. And when I was working as a lawyer, I wasn't thinking every day about, transitioning to be a broadcaster full time. That just happened for me. And I'm not thinking right now about, hey, someday I'd like to be a general manager in the NBA, or someday I'd like to, have an ownership interest in this, or I'd like to do that. I'm not thinking about that. Maybe I should, but I hope that's a byproduct of being happy and fulfilled in what I'm doing, rather than maybe not being as goal-oriented or career-oriented as I should be.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. And just as you mentioned earlier, coming off of another college basketball season, I was curious, in your professional opinion, what do you think is the biggest challenge that college basketball faces today?
I think college basketball is really, really healthy overall. It's not as healthy as I remember it. It was probably healthier back in the 80s and 90s when the players stayed longer. And so our biggest problem as a game is probably fan interest. And then for the teams themselves, is keeping their roster together from year to year. So when your top assets are leaving early, and leaving early relative to what we had become accustomed to, which was 4-year players, that's a problem. So, look, roster turnover, these players are assets of the universities and the teams that they play for. The NCAA doesn't like to hear that, because they want to pretend that these players are just students like any other student, and they're these replaceable commodities that don't have any value. They have tremendous value. Otherwise, we wouldn't bother recruiting them the way we do. So I think retention of players is the biggest issue, and that's the biggest turnoff for fans, the fact that they can't wrap their arms around the game for longer than a year. And the best players leave and go to the NBA. So that's something we're going to have to deal with. And I happen to believe that the only way we're going to deal with it is to provide incentive for players to stay, and that incentive is going to be financial. And we're gonna have to pay them. And I don't think it's just pay them because it's the right thing to do. I happen to believe it's the right thing to do on a moral front. I don't think you can make billions of dollars off of people and then claim that you're some kind of amateur endeavor. Amateur sports doesn't make billions of dollars, and this makes billions of dollars. But I think it's also the right thing to do for the sport. That if players are under contract, they're going to stay for the length of their contracts. That doesn't mean that LeBron James all of a sudden would go to college. He wouldn't. But more of the best players would stay longer, and that's better for the game overall.
No, I really appreciate that, and I've listened to you a few times on ESPN, and I think you make a very valid point, and I think it is tough when players leave after 1 year, and as you mentioned, player retention is a big thing. I was curious, Jay, if you have a morning specific or daily ritual that you feel has led to both your professional as well as your personal success.
Ritual, I would say no. I probably do the same things every day, like most people, because I'm also a creature of habit. But there's not any one thing that I have to do other than perhaps get a cup of coffee before I get rolling in the morning. But I've always been the type that once I put my feet on the floor, I've got a plan for the day, and I usually think before I go to bed the night before about what do I need to do tomorrow. And I have not necessarily a list of things, but I have an idea, and it's usually a pretty solid one of things I want to accomplish. The course of the day may take you in a different direction than you had planned, but I think going to bed with some sort of plan the night before, at least it helps me sleep a little bit better. And then when I wake up, I've got an idea of exactly where I'm going and what I'm doing. In some jobs, especially when I was a lawyer, I didn't have a whole lot of choice as to what I did. I have a little more directional choice now, but I had a longer list of things back then that I had to do and get done, or else. And so there was a lot of have to in my life back then. Now, based upon the job that I do, there's a little more want to as to what I want to pursue, what I think is important creatively on how I want to pursue, talking about college basketball and showing it on television and all that. I have a little more editorial control than I did when I first started. And that provides a little more freedom as to the way I do things.
No, I like that. I think it's a good point you bring up is have to versus want to. And I think at different points in your life, obviously in your career, you have a little bit more freedom. And obviously you've done a great job with your professional career now. And I think, as you mentioned, it has allowed you to have some of those want tos more as opposed to the have tos when you were a trial lawyer. I was curious, who's had the greatest influence on your life?
My parents. My mom and dad were hard workers and family first people. And so I had every advantage growing up of having that, of having two people that were totally invested in making me better and helping me get where I wanted to be. So it wasn't necessarily what they wanted for me. I mean, my parents were they were sticklers for behave yourself and do what you're supposed to do. That was important. And they expected me to do the best that I could in school. But everything else was basically up to me. And they had suggestions and wanted me to try different things, especially my mom. She wanted me to be, trying to think of the right word, like cultured, I guess. So I did some things that I didn't particularly enjoy, but she wanted me to experience. And later on in life, I was very grateful that she did because I was a little more aware of things going on around me that I wouldn't have been aware of otherwise. But I think my parents by far were the most influential.
That's interesting, and you touch on that a bit in your book. And I think, as you mentioned, they were hard workers and they were family first. And I think a lot of people and a lot of the guests we've interviewed so far in our podcast have had one or both of their parents that have had a meaningful impact as well. I was curious, what has been the most meaningful decision that you've made in your entire career?
Oh, my wife getting married. I met my wife in college. And we decided to get married about 8 years after we met, maybe even 10. It might have been 10. But we got married in 1992. And that was the best decision I've ever made because the two of us have been you probably hear this a lot. Maybe it's cliche, but we've been a great partnership. And I can't think of anyone who has been more supportive or more helpful to me in pursuing the things that I've felt strongly about, including stances I've taken where you're not sure. Like it's more than just when you get married and you have kids. It's more than just you. And so when you're taking, and sometimes you have to take a risk and have to take a stance that may not be popular, given your position, and to have somebody with you saying, nope, if you think it's the right thing, let's do it. And hopefully I've been I don't know if I've been as supportive of her as she's been of me, but hopefully I have been. But that's been by far the most meaningful.
I couldn't agree more. I'm very fortunate and lucky myself to have, I feel, the perfect partner in my corner. And to your comment, I hope that she feels the same as in that regard with me, as opposed to me being there for her as well. Here's an out of the box question: if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Well, there's actually a great joke about this that, when if I had said another broadcaster, Sean McDonough would say, "Hey, you don't want to have dinner with me?" And I would say, "Okay, I'll have dinner with you, dead." But if I could have dinner with anyone, I don't know, it'd probably be someone like John Wooden. Even though I got a chance to meet him, I never got to sit down with him and have a meal or anything like that. It would be somebody in basketball, because that's been the most important thing in my life. And I've spent so much time in and around the game. It would probably be somebody like that. I've been lucky that I've got to have dinner with a lot of people in the game that have been sort of kind of dream things, and that's been really cool for me. I have to remind myself every day that, man, how cool is this job? That I get to watch practice with Tom Izzo running a practice, or Jay Wright, or all these different Bill Self, all these different coaches, and I've gotten to know all of them over the years, and you don't want that to ever seem like it's routine. But in answer to your question, I'd probably say John Wood.
Now, that's a great segue into one quick point. Is I believe we exchanged a couple messages last week, but I just had Fred Kortelbaum, the assistant coach at Kansas University, on last week, and he talked about your book, and I asked him the same question about who we would like to have dinner with, and he said Coach Wooden. And just to share one quick story with you, about 2.5 years ago, I was the head coach of a high school basketball team, and we went through about a 2 or 3 game losing streak, games I believe we should have won, and I contacted Freddie Q, and we just had a conversation, and I asked him, I said, is there something that you've read recently or something you could share, because I'm having a tough time connecting with my team and my players? And ironically, he had said that you were just at one of their practices, and he recommended your book, Toughness, which is what I read. And ironically, you and I have a 1 degree of separation, where my best friend, Greg Butler, happened to be one of your high school basketball teammates. So not only is the basketball world very, very incestuous as far as just the connections, but I've found that there are so many ways to connect indirectly with people in basketball.
Yeah, it's that's great about you and Greg. His brother Dave, Dave, Greg, and Mike Butler were all really good friends of mine growing up. We were all teammates together. I don't know that Mike and Greg played together, because Mike was older than Dave, so those three never probably played together at the same time. But a great family and terrific players too, and especially Dave. I think as good as Greg was, Dave was the best player in that family. He was a great player.
Yeah, unfortunately, I believe he blew out his Achilles, which really kind of hindered his career. But we played together, Greg, Dave, and I, a few times, and you could just see that Dave was just a few steps above in his quickness. But unfortunately, his Achilles injury really kind of curtailed his career.
Yeah, Dave, we were lucky back in, we grew up in Rolling Hills, California. And so Dave and I played together from probably 5th grade all the way through high school. And, we were teammates for basically 8 or 9 years together. And he went to Cal, and I think he's in the Cal Basketball Hall of Fame. As an outstanding player, and really one of the kind of truly versatile players back then. You hate to say back then, because we graduated high school in 1982, but that's back then now. And so he was ahead of the curve as far as his versatility and his ability to play inside and out, good passer and really good ball handler at his size. He was a truly great player. We had a great high school team. We had several guys that played Division I. And then our point guard, Jim Denver, should have played Division I. It was really, really good group. I was lucky to play with those guys.
Wasn't Reggie Miller in or around the same league as you guys were?
Yes. Yeah, I played against Reggie in high school. He was a year behind us in school. He went to Riverside Poly High School, so we played against Reggie a lot during the summertime. And talk about a guy who was ahead of his time. I mean, guys used to kind of scoff at Reggie shooting from the distance that he did. And as skinny as Reggie was as a pro with the Pacers in the NBA, he was really skinny as a high school player. And he would pull up from 27, 28 feet at times. And back then there was no 3-point line. And so that was considered crazy. But he was ahead of the curve too in his ability. But Reggie grew up kind of in the shadow, if you will, of his sister Cheryl, who was the best women's player in the world. And when she was at Riverside Poly, I remember when I was in high school, Cheryl Miller and I were the same year. I actually played against her when I was a little kid because she played boys basketball growing up at times. And she scored 105 points in a high school game. And then Reggie's brother Daryl played in the major leagues. I remember he played for the Angels. He might have played for other teams too, but he was a catcher in the major leagues. That was a heck of an athletic family.
I was about to say that's quite a family. Well, listen, Jay, before we let you go, I just wanted to ask if you had any parting words for our listeners.
Well, I wouldn't presume to be able to give advice to anybody, but I guess I would finish the way we started, and that is just the idea of most of what people consider success in any endeavor comes from just sticking with it and showing up every day, ready to go to work. And I don't know that it's necessarily you have to have this gritty attitude, but you do have to show that grit and perseverance and stick-to-itiveness. Tom Crean, the former coach at Indiana, sent me a really good article a couple days ago about sort of perseverance and the idea that with young kids, rather than praise them for their talent or ability, if you praise them for their stick-to-itiveness and their persistence and their perseverance, they tend to do better. And I think that's true of adults too. That talent is one thing. Talent's necessary and important. You can't get by without having an aptitude for what you're doing. But your attitude and how you do it is more important than your aptitude, in my judgment.
No, that's great, and I could not agree more. Excuse me. In regards to the attitude, I think having the right attitude and the right mindset really can have a positive and significant difference in all areas of life. Well, listen, Jay, it's been a complete honor speaking with you today, and I can't thank you enough for both your time as well as your insightful comments. Thanks again, and I look forward to hopefully speaking with you soon.
Hope so, Chris. Thanks for having me.
All right, buddy. Thank you. To sum up today's episode and our theme of the day, attitude, Jay Bilas shared his very interesting yet powerful personal views with us. One of his comments I thought was spot on. He mentioned that as a player, his objective was to be difficult to play against, but easy to play with. As we were wrapping up today's episode, Jay delivered some very strong points. He discussed the importance of sticking with it and showing up every single day. The last point Jay shared with us was how important a positive attitude is, and how your attitude and how you do it is more important than your aptitude. How is your attitude? Do you have a positive attitude of gratitude, or are you just going through the motions? I challenge you today to give your best effort by delivering your best attitude. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.